Thank you, colleagues. We are continuing. I just basically introduce Prof. John Vollmann to you. He is a legend in education. He's many things to many people. For me, he will always be the academic president of Cornerstone that I got to know when I first came to Cornerstone. And he has played a vital role in education transformation in post-apartheid South Africa, serving on multiple ministerial task teams and as chairperson of Umalusi Council for over a decade. Now, if you've listened to our various speakers, you know, the one mentions something and then the other person has actually served on that board or on that body. So yeah, we really have an excellent lineup, huge figures in the education world here today, and I'm privileged about that. So Prof. John Vollmann last year, I think, approached Cornerstone and said that he wanted to create something which went through various iterations and became the Cornerstone Leadership Academy. So together with this conference, we are launching that academy today, and I'm leaving it over to him to tell you about that. And then he is basically here as founder, and he will then introduce co-founder Reddy, who is our next speaker. Thank you.
Very good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I must say it's really wonderful to be at Cornerstone. I listened to Dr. Lloyd. I remember coming back to this country in 1990 after 10 years in America. And the conventional signposts were all washed away in education. And we were celebrating the chaos of a new beginning. And so there were white papers and green papers and off-color papers, because some of these things were working at cross purposes with each other, as Dr. Lloyd had said. And so we're very fortunate to have people like Dr. Lloyd, Dr. Zoran, Reddy. Both were architects of a part of a new education landscape. Maybe we can always talk about that. So we will always be grateful for people like that. But my job right now, for the next few minutes, is to talk about the challenge of leadership and the expression that we are giving as Cornerstone to it. As Dr. Maria Lowe said, over the past year, a few of us, there's the CEO, Asir Al-Sawat, Dr. Reddy, Professor Ndebo, there he is, from Stellenbosch University. Of course, the Dean, who has really been the lifeblood in this whole movement, and Basil Leonard, some of you may know, was in Cornerstone Institute. Yeah, we got together and said, Cornerstone has a history of getting involved in leadership. So why don't we concretize it and make it a Cornerstone presence in ethical leadership, which is the passion of my mentor, Dr. Reddy, who I will introduce in 5 minutes. And so we met quite regularly, I think once every second week over the last several months, and I am so impressed with the work that the Dean is doing behind the scenes, so that we're now at the point where we'd like to launch the Cornerstone Leadership Academy. And I'm not going to read it because I'm already in injury time. But it's in the brochure at the back of the program. You will see the part that I want to say is that there's a recognition of the complexity of the world in which we live and the need for dealing with dilemmas. And I will say a few things about that in a minute. But what it says is that the Cornerstone Leadership Academy aims to empower current, emerging, and aspiring leaders with knowledge and skills that are appropriate for our context, and specifically ethical leadership. And it gives a few examples there. And so today, we are launching the Cornerstone Leadership Academy. It's a vision Dr. Reddy has had. I was the acting vice chancellor at TUT, Durban University of Technology, and he was my boss. And we had often, in fact, we had a similar conference, a big conference, on ethical leadership while I was there. So, what we want to do in the second part of this year is to, you wrote me a 5 minutes. So, is to launch a few courses to get the show on the road. And you will get to hear about that. We are still meeting to discuss how we're going to do that. But it will be, at the beginning, micro-credential. And I've spoken to some people in Malusi, the SACWA and QCTO about that. But let me just say, because I've got 5 minutes left, so let me make 5 points. No, I can only do 4 points because I must introduce Dr. Reddy, the other. The one thing, when I was at the University of UKZN, I was one of the vice principals. We had a Center for Ethics. And Professor Martin Brzezinski was the head of that. All our students had to do a course in ethics. But I just want to say that Martin Brzezinski, because I was involved in building a new curriculum in this country for schools, Martin Brzezinski challenged us. And he said, I want you to answer this question. What kind of people do we want to see coming out of our schools and higher education institutions who are equipped to take up their place as the citizens of an ethically strong, admirable nation? And what kind of educator, curriculum, educational ethos will be needed in order to produce such people? So, question, do you regard this country right now as an admirable nation, admirable society? I think we didn't meet that standard. And I will say that without hesitation. But we can get there. And today we're making our own contribution as Cornerstone. And it's not going to solve, Cornerstone by itself cannot change the country, but we can make a contribution. Let me just say, and how many minutes now? Let me just say, we're living in a world that's complex, as our brochure says. And we need leaders who are ethically skilled. And gone are the days where we think that the choices in life is just between right and wrong. Many times, as leaders, we have to make a different choice between two rights. The right versus right. I can give you an example. Justice is right, mercy is right. But if you're a judge, you have to choose justice or mercy. As people who work for bosses. Another example is, there's truth on the one side, there's loyalty on the other side. That's an ethical dilemma. So, do you want to be loyal, or do you want to stand for the truth? Short term, long term, etc. On Louise's chapter, there was a very nice quote last night by Lincoln Marley. It's got to do with a very important, and the last point I want to make is about, at the heart of ethical leadership is the heart of a servant leadership. And if you don't understand that, listen to Lincoln Marley when he says, if you feel that serving is beneath you, then leadership is beyond you. If you think that you don't want to be a servant leadership, then a servant leader, then leadership is beyond you. So, I had the privilege, as I said, of working under Dr. Jeremy Reddy. I served on the board at DUT. He was the chairman. I served as the acting vice chancellor. He was my boss. And I know him as somebody very strong moral conviction to stand up for what's right. And he moves on that basis, moves forward with a determination and strength. And I've seen him in action. And he knows, and I know, what I'm referring to. But Dr. Reddy is, as I've already said, the architect of higher education in this country, because of the work of the National Commission, which led to the white paper that Dr. Lloyd was saying. And he's had so many experiences, not only at DUT, but in other parts of the world. And as a brochure you will see, it says that he worked in Jordan, he worked in Afghanistan, and he continues to do work in higher education as a management consultant. And so it is with great pleasure, my honor, to hand over this microphone to Dr. Reddy. Thank you. Please. Cool. Now, where must
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you can hear me. I wish to begin by thanking Dean Mariando and Cornerstone College for inviting me to share with you some ideas about and thoughts about leadership. I think you will agree we are living through a period of profound upheaval and uncertainty in this world. Women and children are being slaughtered in Gaza. We have the worst humanitarian crisis in Uganda, and there's a brutal war unfolding in the Ukraine, and the world's superpower is headed by a dangerously unstable leader. If we look at our own country, you've heard from our politician this morning, is that we have a national government of national unity, which is rather fragile. We have one of the most unequal societies in the world, plagued by the triple challenges of poverty, of inequality, and unemployment. We have a high crime rate that is out of control, and we feel the number of the minorities in the country are feeling marginalized. And so, if we ask ourselves, at this time, with that kind of world, I think our nation needs ethical and imaginative leaders at every level of society and government, whose education and training enables them to cope humanely and intelligently with the complex problems of the rapidly changing world. That is really the task of the Cornerstone Leadership Academy. It is a monumental task, but we should begin with a modest beginning. In speaking about a common understanding of leadership, it was one of the pioneering scholars, James McGregor Burns, in 1979, almost 50 years ago, said, while there's a universal craving of our times for compelling and creative leadership, at the same time, it is one of the most observed and least understood phenomena. And some 30 years later, another scholarship leader, Professor Keith Grings at the University of Warwick, said that as his knowledge of leadership increased, as he read more and more, his understanding of leadership actually diminished. And one of the problems might be is that, unlike physics and chemistry and some of the older disciplines, leadership is a relatively new discipline, and we don't have the theoretical understanding and the body of knowledge really to comprehend leadership, and that is one of our problems of leadership. And it also may be that leadership is not really a science. It is an art and what we may call a heuristic model, where you actually learn by doing things on a daily basis. And the thing about leadership is that while we all speak about leadership, there are four things that come to mind. One, do we have really a common understanding of leadership? Secondly, what kind of leadership that we are searching of? And John spoke about ethical leadership, and that might be important. And the third, notwithstanding the importance of leadership, does leadership have any limitations? And lastly, how do we train leaders? Is it in their DNA, or is it like any other discipline we could educate and train? And one of the things that we know is that if you look at the slide, is that in any society, we need a number of things for them to succeed. We need a common voting system, we need leaders, and we need a number of chapter institutions, we need voting and so on. But despite all of this, there comes a time when leadership at the top level may fail. And we all know what happened when we had the HIV/AIDS crisis. You remember that? When the government failed to provide antiretroviral drugs. And who came to our rescue? But it was a treatment action campaign, which went out into the streets and eventually went out in the government to the Constitutional Court. And as a result of that, the government had to provide, antiretroviral drugs and saved many lives. And here was an example of leadership, where the leadership at the upper level failed. Leadership at another level, society succeeded. And one of the strengths, I think, in our country we have a strong civil society. And we almost must cherish that and never let that crumble, because it can come to our rescue. And we also sometimes think about leadership as a very isolated phenomenon. But leadership, according to Donald Lapkin in the slide, has 4 integrated components. It is the leader, the follower, and context and purpose. And we have to think of a leader in these 4 aspects in order to fully comprehend the nature of that leadership. Increasingly, many writers, such as Barbara Cowden, have written about the importance of followership not as a passive phenomenon, but as a determining factor in the understanding of leadership. In this college, Marianne Lowe, in her book, has written about the importance of, the leadership and followership, and especially the communication between the two, in her book, the big called Leading Experts. In an excellent publication called The Truth About Leadership, these 2 authors, Moses and Costa, undertaking research over 30 years, analyzed over 1 billion responses from some 70 countries across continents, and came to the conclusion, while the content of leadership has not changed, the context has changed dramatically. Just at the words, please. And how is that context changed dramatically? First, we had new technologies, which have both connected and disconnected people. The working force today is increasingly diverse. They are multicultural, dispersed, horizontal, and distributed. Financial institutions across the world have exploded and imploded. Global warming is with us with its many negative effects. The COVID pandemic has devastation across the world. And today we have artificial intelligence, on the one hand with immense potential, at the same time with grave dangers if we don't manage it properly. Costas and Vollmann also, when they did this extensive research, asked people, and I think, Shari, you try to go through this, what are the qualities that you look for in the leadership? And as you can see there, at the top of the list is the quality of honesty. And when you are honest as a leader, half the battery is won. And one current leader in this world, some of you may well know, in a television debate with his opponent, where the journalists analyzed that debate, found that leader spoke 75 untruths. And yet, a less than discerning followership decided to elect that man as a leader of one of the most powerful countries in the world. How do we educate a followership to be more discerning in electing our leaders? And that, I think, is a challenge that we have to keep in mind. We keep emphasizing the importance of leaders, but followership is equally important. But referred to keep Gritz earlier on, who told us that as his knowledge of leadership increased, his understanding decreased. He wrote a very interesting paper called With the Problems and Clumsy Solutions, the Road of Leadership. And in this paper, he analyzed our problems into threefold. One, there are common problems that leaders have to cope with. And these are very critical problems. An example of that is when we had that Twin Towers be destroyed in New York City. The Mayor Giuliani had to act in a command situation. Take very quick actions. You had no time. If you had fire in this building, Dean Murray and Lowe would have to act quickly. Those are commanders. Second, you have what we call routine management problems. To see the electricity working, the workers are paid, the garden is looked after. Those are routine management problems, and leaders really lead that to the management. And the third group of problems, what we call wicked problems. These are problems that have no easy solution. And an example of that is climate change. Such problems require very careful thought. They require reflection, they require collaboration, and they require time. Even with all of those things, your solution to that may not be a very happy one. It, in fact, may be clumsy. But the problems with leaders, I think when they begin to act, don't make a differentiation between the three types of problems. If you apply a command approach to a wicked problem, then you're going to be in trouble. So I think it's important for leaders to reflect on the type of problems that they are really experiencing. Leadership and emotional intelligence. Effective leaders must possess a critical mass of emotional intelligence. This includes, among others, self-awareness, knowing one's strengths, weaknesses, drives, values, impact on others. We should have self-regulation, controlling and directing your impulses. Motivation for new phenomena, social skills and building up rapport with others, and importantly, the quality of empathy. Recently, that well-known leader in the U.S. and our countryman Elon Musk made the statement that the fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy. Elon Musk. At the same time, one of our great scholars, Jewish scholars who had to leave Nazi Germany and settle in the United States, I think it was the 1950s, made the statement. The death of human empathy is one of the earliest and most chilling signs of a culture about to fall into barbarism. Ladies and gentlemen, if we reflect upon what is happening in Gaza today, doesn't this kind of definition fit in what's going on? And in an important book in 1921, the same author, Hannah called Origins of Totalitarianism, warned us about the cult of leaders who would tell us a pack of lies and they become authoritarian leaders, and warned us, beware of us following such leaders that we know in any parts of the world today, such leaders are in vogue. When we were at DUT that John talked about, we were lucky to have with us a leadership scholar, Jamaat Seo. She is one of the leading scholars in leadership, and in particular in leadership ethics. She was a former scholar, and she spent a couple of months with us, and we learned a great deal from her. And in talking about ethics and effects with this, she says we should ask 4 questions. Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing it the right way? Am I doing it for the right reason? And am I using what I learn? If you ask these 4 questions, then you're probably on the way to understanding what an ethical leadership is about. I think we have to make a distinction between ethics and morals. Ethical behavior, ladies and gentlemen, is consistent with one's own principles and values, honesty, fairness, and equity. In all our interpersonal activities, be they personal or professional, respecting the dignity, diversity, rights of individuals and groups of people. It is a universal set of principles that we can all subscribe to. But we have to differentiate this from moral being, which can differ from time to time from one set of beliefs to another. In some parts of the world, it is necessary for women to be covered. In other parts, it is not. And those are morality differences, and that we have to differentiate from ethical behavior. What then are the ingredients of an ethical organization? An ethical organization does the right thing, being honest, fair, and democratic. To everyone in the organization, we have a common touchstone about it. So the whole organization is driven by an ethical ethos. Ethical leadership is in the process of influencing people to act through principles and values and beliefs and embrace ethical behavior. You remember we had a number of King reports, and the King 4 report in particular emphasizes the importance of ethical behavior, and all organizations and businesses, should take note of that King 4 report. What then are the principles and practices of ethical behavior which we can trace back to Aristotle? First, it is service to others. Second, it is justice to others. Thirdly, it is honesty. And fourthly, it is building a sense of community. And I think if you embrace these values, you are then part of an ethical organization. And it was one of our greatest scientists of all time, Albert Einstein, would say, without an ethical culture, there is no salvation for humanity. And at the same breath, he said, I believe in one thing, that only a life lived for service is a well-lived worth living. I will out of time.
8 minutes left.
I'm going to skip this. Let's talk a little bit about transformative leadership. The word transformation I hesitate to use because I think it's an overused and abused word in our country. It simply means in many places you replace one group of people with another group with a different pigmentation for whatever. But I think transformation should have a much more deeper and profound understanding. And when you apply that to leadership, if you listen to some of the people who have written about transformative leadership, I think it made sense. And this is a few things they talk about transformative leadership. First, transforming leaders are motivated by an ethical purpose and are driven by moral courage in whatever they do. It is collaborative, it is concentrated, and it is empowered. They aim to bring about just solutions in economic, governance, and educational levels. They engage in analysis and action to deconstruct systems of power and privilege that keep inequality in place. Ultimately, these transformative leaders are agents of the individual that change in the community and democratic society. So transformative leaders then bring about fundamental and important change, ethical change in a democratic society. Much has been talked about Ubuntu leadership. What do we need? What is our understanding about Ubuntu leadership? As I understand it, Ubuntu is a term, as an ethic that stretches across multiple countries in the continent. It's a concept that is generally regarded as the foundation of sound human relations in African societies. It is a cultural value system that emphasizes humaneness and hopes to become better, leaders. Ubuntu teaches, I am because they are, and they are because I am. It needs humaneness of being human and encompasses values such as universal brotherhood, of sharing, of treating and respecting other people as human beings. Another way of seeing Ubuntu is that through the notion of collectivism, which in contrast to the rugged individualism in other societies being subordinate to a collective culture such as a state, a nation, or a race in a particular country. While Ubuntu is being, well, I'm not sure why Ubuntu is not taught more at universities and colleges, why it is not embraced more as a very central pillar of, of leadership. And I think, John, in our Leadership Academy, it's something we need to emphasize. Actually, when we listen to you, you're looking at leadership at the higher education terrain. And if we look at the higher education terrain, we have 26 universities, we have 50 TVET colleges. And each of those, we have FLCs, we have councils, we have staff associations, we need vice chancellors, we need leaders. We need leaders and CETA. How then do we begin to develop this huge pool of leaders? And that's one reason for us launching the Leadership Academy. And as this slide shows, the best leaders are the best learners. And you can develop as a leader through observation of others, to study in the classroom, to read books, to reflecting an experience, active experimentation, and to research. It doesn't come easy. And we learn by doing, we learn by our mistakes. And it takes years and many, many hours of leadership theory and development. If we expose somebody to a leadership course, as we expect to do in the academy, it is the beginning of their long journey. They have to learn for the rest of it. Then we could go with this personal experience of this particular photograph. When I was Vice Chancellor at the University of Durban, West, we invited a scholar there to be our business scholar. And the man you see there on the left is Mohammed Mamdouh. He's a professor of African Studies both in Makerere University and today Columbia University. And he spent some time with us, with his wife Miranaya and his son Zoran. And Zoran at that time was 2 years old when he was at the University of Delhi. In the late 1990s, I attended a conference in Uganda, and then I met up with the Mamdouhs. And this was a photograph taken visiting Victoria Falls, Corbickley. And you see here Professor Mamdani, Miranaya, and Zoran, who is now 9 years old. And today, Zoran became the Democratic candidate in the city of New York. And one of the things that he did during his leadership development, when he started developing his leadership qualities 3 months ago, he had 2 people in his campaign. When he finished his campaign, he had 50,000 people working for him. And these are people on the ground. And one day during his campaign, he started walking across Manhattan, 11 o'clock at night, with a group of his supporters. And he walked the breadth of that city until 3 o'clock in the morning. And as he walked, this is a night, he met street cleaners, the people who collect their refuse, the people, the police force, the ferry drivers, and a whole lot of people who were keeping New York City safe. And he said to when he was interviewed, these are the people that I need to communicate. These are the people I want to be mayor of. These are the people I want to serve. And I believe, when I listened earlier on, that leadership is a heuristic model. You learn by doing. You learn by the kind of thing you do. That is the one way to become, I believe, an ethical community leader. Another way to become, you can surround yourself with billionaires. And I think the followership should make a judgment on the kind of leader they need.
Room was open. Dr. Reddy, you said on one of your slides that the context of leadership is pretty much the same, but the context has changed vastly. From your perspective and your experience, what is the main implication of that for the leaders today?
Let me go back and, perhaps illustrate that a little more strongly. The last World War between 1935 and 1945, it was won by the Allies, and the inspiring leader there was Winston Churchill. You all remember. He made very eloquent speeches, and he really rallied the troops and so on, and extremely successful. In 1945, when the war ended in England, and there was a general election, he was defeated, and the Labour Party came into being. And the Labour Party came into being, and one of the great things they did at that time, to put it to service the National Health Service, which was a very great step. And here was a country which, in a context of war, selected one kind of leader, and in the context of peace, chose another kind of leader. And that was the difference. In our country, if we go back to Nelson Mandela, if you remember him, he was a lawyer once, even a boxer. He was a freedom fighter, a non-violent freedom fighter. And when the context changed, when there was no responses, he decided to take up arms. He went underground and he was in prison. And in prison, he was able to negotiate our future. And when he came out, and, very dramatically, we, had a very peaceful revolution. And then he knew gracefully when after 5 years to retire. And you can see he's a unique leader. In different contexts, he was able to function. Not every leader can do that. And in our country, you know how the context has changed in the last 30 years. We expected a variety of things, and the world now is a very different place, what it was 30 years ago. And today, I think, when we have the profound problems that we mentioned earlier on, it requires a new kind of reach. And how we develop that new leadership, we heard a little bit from Musimo Elani this morning, but that is the challenge that faces. We know the context is different.
Thank you. Dr. Reddy, the absence of trust in our society is a big problem. There's no trust in the police. There's no trust in the politicians. There's no trust in business. Are we a failed state? Or is there something we can do to restore trust?
I think that, John, you probably raised one of the most important things in leadership. Deficiency on trust and a lack of trust. I'm not sure how we build that. Does it start from the home? Does it start from upbringing? Does it start from education? Does it start from being in business and so on? But I think at every level, we need to be driven, I think earlier said, by a set of values. And amongst those set of values, the question of honesty, of integrity, and of trust is the most important. When you find your fingers on the toe, when you realize that you're accused of something, the honorable thing for you to do is to step back and say, I've made a mistake. I have lost the trust of people. I should give somebody else a job. If you look around in the country, that is not what's happened. And this is what we need to inculcate in our students, in our community, that trust is the most important thing in our community in building up integrity and leadership. And should you lose that trust, and it does happen, you must step back. That is something we need to inculcate. But let's face it, it's not easy. It's going to take time, but we need to drive that process.
Interesting that you say step back, because here we say step aside. Stand be mystery.
Yeah. This is a question. Maria, somebody at the back.
Thank you very much for such an insightful. Can you hear me?
Barely. Speak as loud, please.
Thank you very much for such an insightful lecture, I would say, and also to point out the ethical and moral importance of being a leader. Also, what comes to mind is, the theory. There's so many theory, and I think you hone into that as well, about leadership. And we, sometimes we are so thrown back and forth of all the theory, but the praxis, component of that, I think, for me, is an important factor. So bringing that theory down into the experience, and build from that experience. Also, just to hone in what Professor Vollmann said about the, the trust. Is it not possible if one looked at a projection from, or maybe a global or a golden head, to build that trust, right? Through our experiences with one another, and try to build onto that, because it is difficult if trust has been lost to rebuild that trust. And how do one go about that? Taking in consideration our diversity of who we are. So is that not a golden thread that one can maybe pick up? Find that golden thread, take a step back, or I wouldn't say step aside, but perhaps take a step back and reflect on building that trust to get people where we need to get them in terms of thought leadership, what I want to point out. So we are in thought leadership, we look at the leaders with experience and, has come through the brunt, and you look at the leaders that is also the followers, but they have so much contribution. And when that trust factor is not there, then, that followers is very hesitant to contribute, because there is no investment, for their followers as well. So just in terms of the trust factor, is that golden thread maybe, an option that one could build towards or build on? Thank you.
Take that more as a comment than a question. I think what you explained, you very well made a bigger case with the importance of trust. And that is something that...
Thank you very much, Dr. Reddy. It's always an absolute privilege to listen to you. And I'm going to ask you a question. Imagine this were a group of grade 11s and you're talking to them. What would you tell them about one or two things that a grade 11 should take forward in leadership? If you were, say, these are the next leaders, what are one or two things you would tell a grade 11 right now they could do in South Africa right now?
That was precisely the question I tried to avoid. Because, when somebody asks you to define leadership, or what it is, if you go around the room here, you'll probably find 25, 30 different definitions. And 25 different things, they will talk about what is important leadership. So I tried in my lecture to try and, paint the complexity of it and the wholeness of it. When I talked about the context, the leader, the follower, the context and premise. So it is a large, holistic thing, and many, many components of it. But now that you pressed me to answer those two things, and I think the one thing that we talked about just later is the question of trust and the question of ethics. And I think those are primarily two, the central pillars of any kind of leadership, of any kind of society that they want. So we don't have trust, and and if we don't have ethics, then I think we are a broken society.
Thank you. I should have introduced myself. I'm Jeff Jacobs from Reddy. We should be working underserviced schools. And in the work that we do, we often come across the context, the reality is one of quite a traumatized environment, traumatized context. And I wonder whether we're not missing the reality of South Africa's past, our history, that what we're sitting with, what we're talking about here is aspirational, ethical leadership, 100% correct. But what we often don't take into account is the fact we've got wounded leadership that shows up in all kinds of places. The work we do with principals, with heads of department, they're dealing with trauma on an almost daily basis. And I just wonder whether we shouldn't be putting that thread of a trauma-informed perspective more into our deepening our understanding with nuance of leadership. Just wondered what your response to that is.
That one, look, I think you raise very important points. And we can talk about all of these fancy concepts about ethical leadership and so on. But if we have a deeply traumatized society, and and the comment you're talking about, and if we look at what's happening at the schools, the gender biology, trauma, all of that. And if you look at particularly among the black population, when I worked at the health sector, when we took at history, 60% of them come from single-family homes. There's no father, very often. And they come from, that is partly due to our migrant labor system, partly due to the HIV pandemic, and so on. And so we have young kids that, growing up without a family background, and sometime after the HIV, you look at 10-year-olds looking after 2-year-olds, and that happens. And I think perhaps there's another dimension. We should be tackling exactly what you're reaching. How we deal with the mental health, of the trauma of our people. And I think schools and the education department, together with our very important, or highlighting that problem and dealing with that. And I would agree with you. I think that precedes building up the ethical leadership. You can't do that when you have traumatized kids, when you have deeply broken homes with those kinds of countries. I think it's a very important point you raise. We need to keep in mind, George, in building our leadership, especially when we're dealing with young people.
This is about the question then.
I was thinking before the last gentleman spoke, and I think what I want to say is probably related to that point, because I'm thinking that we also have an inability to be vulnerable when we need to be, and it's probably because I think our context of trauma that we come out of. And I'm wondering how we reach that point where we're able to be vulnerable, because at the moment, a lot of our response is rather to bully when our insecurities surface, and gaps in our own maybe knowledge or how we need to behave, or how that emerges. And I'm reminded of the conference I went to in Dublin in 2004, so long back, when it was my turn to speak, and people said, "Oh, it's our new babies of democracy." And I thought and said, we are not babies of democracy. We're actually adult survivors of abuse. And I think we still are that, because that hasn't been addressed. And I also think that yes, we can speak about a peaceful transition, but at what cost was the peaceful transition? Because we went straight into forgiveness and reconciliation, and I still don't know who we have forgiven for what and who have we reconciled with, because there was no dialogue around that. And so now still there isn't dialogue because we don't know whether space is safe enough to dialogue and whether people will listen if they have a different opinion. So I think an important quality for leadership is to be able to be vulnerable.
Yeah, thank you for that comment.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, for this wonderful presentation. And as we were marketing and explaining honesty and transparency, it's the measure and the heart of the society now. And I'm looking at the U.S. Government, the elections, the previous election. The president was elected because of some conspiracies which are there, which means lying to the good society and having all the conspiracies. Sometimes it takes you to a better position where you want to be. Now, implementing and also implementing those promises, it's a challenge on him, but he's trying his best as well. But now, the thing is, how then do we educate our community so that they can understand that the person who's standing in front of me, what is saying it's a conspiracy, what is saying is not transparent, what is saying is implementable. Because now we're talking about politics, position leadership in politics, you can get there by lying to people, by not. But if you're honest, they're not going to get anywhere. So that's how it goes. So now the most important thing now is to educate. As educators, want to educate the society so that they can see and differentiate that what is saying is implementable. It's not going to get there. Not to realize it when the person is already in position.
I think that, you made the point that I was trying to do earlier on, the importance of educating a followership. You remember that Hannah Lawrence, the Jewish scholar, said that, we have to, in a book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, warned us that these, totalitarian leaders would be speaking a pack of lies. And that's how they build up the leadership. And it's up to a discerning followership, an educated civil society, which I think we need to develop so we can see through those lies and so on. Yet, a country as educated as the United States, you'd see the blunders they have made. And many of them now are probably regretting how they voted, I'm on SIPA. And I think that's something we need to avoid.
A final question or comment?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment, just going back to the question about Alexander Gray's 11 Charles. Yeah, that is an important question about values. All these ethics has got to do with values. The problem with values is can't be imposed. It has to be lived. So when I go to any school, whether it's a township school or on the Bosch Boys, there are values written on the wall. Those are, when I come into the foyer, those are not lived values. They are espoused values. And so our kids at school are watching us, see if there's a disconnect between our espoused values and our lived values. And so we must put those values on the table that we have to negotiate, we have to discuss. We can't just impose.
I think, John, you make a very crucial point. I mean, the difference between aspiration and lived values. And I agree with you when I walk past in Musgrave Road, the Durban High School, as this thing about, empathy, intellect, all kinds of fancy words. But how we transfer that into the classroom. And I think here, teachers are very important, parents are very important, And, societal leaders are very important. Religious leaders are very important. So at every level of society, this has to be cultivated.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reddy. I invite everyone to continue this conversation over lunch, which is our next item on the schedule. It's a venue labeled F29 just below us. So if you're comfortable using the stairs, you can just go down one floor, and under this auditorium, there's also a lift on that side if you go that side and then come back towards this side. Please enjoy a few snacks and some conversation. And if we can then be back in this venue by 5 to 1 for our last session. Thank you. And now we are in for our last session with Prof. Zoran who is the current director of the School of Public Leadership in the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences at Stellenbosch University. And his expertise spans the fields of public leadership, which is the one that he's going to be talking about today. And I'm very, very interested in his topic. I think we all are interested in the workings of our current government and how it's put together, and various other aspects of leadership. So thank you, Prof. Ndevu. We are looking forward. And
Thank you very much, Dean, for that introduction. Good afternoon, colleagues. Let me sit on the protocol that has already been observed, just to be safe. It is always difficult to speak after your elders. My culture is actually not allowed to do that, but they have given the permission, but I can speak after them, so I speak under that permission. Today I'm going to talk about public service leadership as a case study that I'm looking at. It's something that I work for. More specifically looking at the government of national unity, the current government that we have, and look at what are the issues that one has to look at in terms of this. I've structured my presentation thinking about the academics that are going to be sitting in this particular meeting and all of that. I will try to tone down on the academic language because following what other colleagues have done actually was to present the context. So I'll try to present the context. My presentation is structured in this format. I have an introduction, and from an introduction, I'm going to talk briefly about the changing world context, the problem statement. I will jump maybe the methodology and explaining in detail the actual theory that I'm talking to, and I'll go to the GNU and talk about strategies and later on present a framework. That's what I'm going to focus on. Public service is about public trust, and I've heard colleagues talking about trust. It is about public trust. It's about individuals. Is it about groups? It is about society trusting public servants or public people who are working in public office and public representatives in ensuring that they deliver services effectively and efficiently. They deliver on the mandate as specifically or purposefully charged. So if that does not happen, then people loses trust in public institution. As 1961, an American president said, it does not help a web of legislation or policies that you have. If you do not have honest people in public office, you are going to have challenges. So having honest people is the main ingredients of any effective public service. So you need to have those in that particular space in order for you to be able to deliver services effectively and efficiently. In the South African context, we have been challenged with leadership in public office. I think we need to perhaps have a discussion solely about what it means to occupy public office. so that we all understand, we all on the same page on what is expected of people that occupy public service office, because that's sometimes not very clear. It is even worse where you have a government that does not have, or a party or parties that do not have full mandate to govern, as we currently have. This is not something new in South Africa. If you look at local government, for example, we have had this since 2016. We have had many local authorities without a majority party or clear winning party. In the Western Cape, I think just under 50% of the municipalities are also governed by coalitions. So this is not something new, but we have not mastered how do we ensure that that particular system of governance, which is what my professor talked about, the issue of followers, what followers want. It is clear that they do not want to give one party a clear majority or clear authority. And how do we manage that particular system more effectively and efficiently? This is compounded by the changing world context. If you look globally, the geopolitics are changing drastically, are changing on a daily basis, and that compounds what are the expectations at local level within the country. If you look at the war in the Middle East that we have already talked about, if you look about the war in Ukraine, which many of us predicted that it will not last more than 3 months, and we are now in the third year, and the Ukrainians are still going strong, it will mean that if something does not give, we might be in for it for a very long time. Right in our doorstep in Sudan, many people are dying, especially in South Sudan, because of the challenges that are there of governance, and all of them informed by public service. Right at home, and there are serious challenges. We've talked about the issues around unemployment. We've talked about the issues around poverty, inequality. We've talked about issues around crime that is spiraling, even lessening in the country. We've talked about challenges around public institutions. In fact, most public institutions, except maybe SARS, are really struggling. And that tells you a big challenge. If all of them are really struggling and you have this one institution that might be more effective, then you have serious problems around that. A few weeks ago, we were waking up on a Sunday morning with a press conference by a police commissioner, and that telling issues around our safety and security system, but broadly the justice system. Just yesterday, the president has suspended the provincial director of public prosecution in Gauteng. That tells you about the challenges that we're experiencing, not only globally, but continentally and locally here at home. We have, for the first time, struggled to pass budgets at home. And this talks to public leadership, the kind of public leadership that we have, and the kind of space that those leaders should operate in. My program statement I've divided into two. One looking at governance, or the impact of governance, and the other one, the impact on leadership. The impact of governance is that no effective decision-making system is in place. In terms of decision-making, efficiency and effectiveness, and Section 195 of the Constitution talks also about economical effect of our decision. It's not happening. And the reason for that is because our governance framework is fragile. I can boldly say that we have weak institutions, and that leads to some of these challenges. The fact that we have weak institutions that we see. There is also lack of accountability. People do as they please, or people think that they can get away with anything. Until we get to a point where there is accountability, we are going to continue to have the challenges that the colleagues talked about, from SETAs, from public institutions, from process waves, and all of those things. We are going to still have these challenges that would ultimately talk to lack of service delivery if nothing happens at that level. There is policy inconsistency. If you are operating, for example, at local government, and you are sitting in the supply chain management division, you are faced with no more than 20 pieces of legislation in order for you to take decisions. Some of them don't even talk to each other. And we see all these problems that we are seeing. It is because of these challenges that we have so many policies that are there, that some of them don't even talk to each other. I'm not sure if they are drafters of those policies here. I apologize. It's here. I would have changed my presentation and I knew about it. But I think that's the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges that we have. If you are a bureaucrat who is a junior bureaucrat, would not be able to grasp and understand all these policies. And we talk about corruption in supply chain, tenders. Some of them are institutional. Some of them are structural. And we need to demystify all these issues around those issues. We've already talked about the erosion of public trust. There is very low trust in public institutions, general in society. There is no trust. I'm not sure about the private sector. I know a colleague talked about. There is also generally mistrust about the public sector's private sector's intention as well in many instances. So there is generally an issue of trust, erosion of trust by public institutions, sometimes by lack of decisions or actions that should be taken, and that erode the trust. Then you come to the impact of leadership. I think I've come to a conclusion that we have weak leaders. There is a challenge of weak leadership. A challenge of leadership that do not want to take bold decisions. A challenge of leaders that wants to be popular. A challenge of leaders that wants to be retained in office through not taking decisions. And once you have that, I'm telling you, you are going downward spiral to, I don't want to say a failed state, but it's something similar to that. That we might do, or something worse than that, I don't know. But we are spiraling down to that if we do not really arrest the situation. And maybe we need a team, as the other colleague said, of people that can make interventions and can be sincere around that. We don't need this bloated government that is not effective and efficient in many cases. There is lack of cohesion. I don't think we have a national vision. And we need to be able to craft that. The National Development Plan has not assisted us in having a common vision. Where it doesn't matter which political party comes into office, but we know what as a country we want to achieve and work towards that particular vision. It might be in education, it might be in health, it might be in safety and security. We need to craft something. Maybe the conversation that will be had soon around the national dialogue will come closer to assisting us with doing that, will come closer to assisting us in engaging us as different stakeholders within society to developing a plan, and not only a plan, because we are also good in developing plans, but we don't implement them. So it must be a plan that is implementable. It must be a plan that we're going to be able to implement, coming together as all stakeholders to be engaged in that. There is issue of capacity. I think we have to reflect as higher education institutions, generally private and public, around the kind of graduates that we produce. Are they fit for purpose? Are they able to make the impact that is required in ensuring that there is capacity in the public service? We need to have a frank discussion around that, reflect on that, and see whether the kind of governance, the center that we are talking about, the Leadership Academy, it might be the intervention that we require, but we need many of those to be able to make the impact that is required. But if we have a few centers of excellence, that might be a starting point, but we might need many of them across the country to be able to make the impact that you require. The issue of corruption. Corruption has become a pandemic in the country. There is no doubt about it that the instances of corruption at the highest level, have been something that is condoned, something that we have gotten used to. It does not happen that a president will have millions of rands stashed in mattresses. That's something that we should talk to and address if there is instances of corruption in that sense. You have a minister, fortunately, he is no longer a minister, that goes to an accounting institution, to a parliament, to a legislature, and refuses to answer questions when being held accountable. So there are many examples and instances of challenges that we see in the public service that have to do with weak leadership and corruption. There is also this notion of everybody wanting to lead. I think Professor Reddy talked about, if we can talk about definition of leadership, we can come out of this room with 30 or more. But there is another challenge, that everybody thinks that they can lead. Everybody thinks that they should be leaders. And that is a big problem that we're experiencing in the country, that everybody wants to raise up their hand and say, I am ready to lead, even in the highest office in the country. So you have this succession pressure that is continuing unabated when people want to all lead. And that creates some of the problems that we have. That if you are in leadership position, you have to also look at your back, be above your shoulders to ensure that nobody is gunning for your position and all of that. And that is the reality that we see. And maybe that's the reason that people are not acting and taking charge of the situation. Consequences of these issues that I've raised would be the state capture version 2. I think we are already seeing signs of that happen, where public institutions are being hijacked by private interest. And that is a dangerous situation if you see that happen. Institutions have been weakened deliberately. You now have weak institutions, strong men. You can look in our parastatals, in our CETAs, in all these entities. You have these institutions being very weak, and people that are running these institutions ensuring that they are the strong men and women, of course, to be politically correct in that sense. So you have that happening. And that is a big challenge that we're seeing. That is going to even get worse. People are impatient now with the government that does not deliver, with public institutions that do not deliver services. They're very impatient. And we see that with the kind of protests that people have resorted to, where they destroy the infrastructure, the basic infrastructure that they actually require. They try to destroy that infrastructure through frustration. Our economy is not growing as it should, and there are many factors to it. We can spend the whole day talking about some of these factors that are causing our economy not to grow. Our reputation international has also been impacted with what is happening currently in the country, what we are now dealing with, some of the challenges that we're experiencing. And we need to look at those, especially if we want to play with the big boys, if we want to play in the big league in terms of geopolitics. This becomes very important, and one has to think about that in whatever you do. I'm not going to spend time on the methodology. I'm going to pass. I thought then we need a leadership that is able to appreciate the current situation, current realities, but also be able to identify opportunities in the challenges that we're experiencing currently. Because the part of the challenges that we're experiencing is that leaders that we have, once will remain in the current situation, in the challenges, every time they misstep, they go back and say it's because of the current challenges that we're experiencing, and not talk about opportunities that are there. And I thought this particular approach might help us to understand that while we explore around issues that are currently existing and try to resolve some of our problems, we also need to look at opportunities. What are the short wins? What are the low-hanging fruits? What are the things that we can do without the bureaucratic system? And start with those while we are dealing with those that are going to take longer for us to be able to deal with and be able to balance. If we can do that, it will then be easier for us to ensure that the economy grows, or we look at alternative opportunities in terms of economic growth. We try and improve the quality of life. I think what we've seen with Arab Springs and all of that, we might see that in South Africa if we don't address the issue of youth unemployment. It is growing challenge, and if we don't deal with those young people who are agitated, who are unemployed, who are some of them are graduates, are going to take up arms against the government if nothing happens, and they might topple this particular government. We see changes that are happening in Africa and generally elsewhere in the world as well, and that might happen if we don't deal with our challenges as a collective, as public institutions, as private institutions, as civil society. We need all of us to put our hands on the deck to deal with some of these issues. If we don't do that, we can forget about this dream that we had of a country that would thrive if we don't do these and deal with the social ills that we have. We also need to deal with how we prioritize the prioritization of resources, I am also of the view that resources are not an issue. The issue is the prioritization of resources. How we prioritize resources. We can learn from countries where those that have decentralized prioritization and allocation of resources, such as Malaysia and all of that, that have actually given communities and empowered them to use resources effectively, rather than having these central, provincial, and regional and local authorities that are sometimes not effective or non-existent for that matter, except for creating jobs for parents. Other than that, they do nothing. So we can be able to do those and deal with some of these issues and ensure. This particular approach would require leaders to be adaptive, would require leaders to appreciate the context that they're dealing with and be able to adapt to change. They ensure that they appoint people that are effective and efficient, people that knows what they should be doing. Because we tend to have all the clowns, all the people, sorry for my level of language. I must remember that I've been a public flight, but we tend to have all the people that should not be in certain important positions, being important positions. And that creates problems when we have all of those. We need people that are able to know that organizations need to be agile, organizations need to deliver effectively and efficiently in terms of what is required of them. We need to foster innovation, and I think we can solve many of our problems if we were to foster innovation, and some of it be grassroots instead of top-down. Recruit people, talented people, people with the requisite skills, people that are fit for purpose, and try and retain them. One of the challenges that we're experiencing in the public service is that we don't retain people that has the requisite skills. So they don't stay long, they leave the public service because it is not conducive for them to operate in that space. Public service institutions should train their culture. They should know that it is about serving others and not those. They should not look into ones. It's not about those that are in public office. It's about those that are served by public institutions. And it's important that we do that. We ensure that those that are served by public institutions are served effectively. So these are some of the characteristics. I don't have to go through all of them. But it's important that we have learning organizations. Learn from experiences, even bad experiences. Even the Zuma years, there are things to learn from it that we should not repeat in this current trajectory in the years to come. So there are many things that we need to learn from. Ensure that we've got ethical organizations, ethical leaders, people that understand the mandate, understand what is expected of them when they occupy public office. And if we have those people in that space, we are likely to be able to get things right. But if we don't have them, the issue of being decisive is also very important. I think when you are in a position of leadership, you are given authority to take decisions, and you must be decisive. If you are not decisive, then we are going to have problems. So we need leaders that are also very decisive at this level. Comes without question that they should be ethical. They should have proper values that drives them. Organizations must also adapt. Public institutions must also opt out. We've got so many departments, units, sections, and we need to adapt that. We need to review them and look at them as to whether they're effective and all of that. We need to ensure that we look at that and be able to ensure that they're adaptive to the need and understand what the need is of the different communities. For example, the engagement that happens with different communities, what is called in BIZOs and all of that, that is not the effective structure of engaging with the different stakeholders, and leaders must understand that. We need to have a dialogue, something that would be a two-way process of engagement with the different stakeholders. I'm told that my time is. Let me go perhaps to the realities. This is the expectation that these leaders would be people that understand, are clear. So I normally say when I talk to my students, my definition of a leader is that a leader must be someone or something that has a head, heart, and hands. So that's my definition of a leader. If you don't have those three components, of course, figuratively, if you don't have those three components, then you can't lead. Then you are not fit to be in a public office and lead. Where you can't think cognitively, when you can present a compelling vision of the unit or section that you are leading, where you don't have compassion, where you don't have compassion for others that you lead, when you are not a doer as well, because many of us want to lead, but we are not doers. In South Africa, if there was a World Cup of policies, we would win without practice. We are so good in writing policies that everything want to write a policy. But the important component of any policy is testing as to whether that policy is relevant, is effective. By implementing it, we actually don't implement. We write one after the other. And you need leaders that are able to do that. And I think the government of national unity, I do understand and appreciate the fact that immediately after the elections, political leaders had 14 days to decide on a new governance. I do appreciate that limitation, which is a big limitation. In countries such as Germany, you have longer time to actually think about the structure of governance, and you then spend that time in really developing a program or a policy process of that government that would ultimately be formed. So 14 days might not be sufficient for one to be able to do that. But even then, even if you have 14 days to be able to form a government of national unity, you must be able to then put certain foundational processes in place to be able to form a government that will be functional and that will hold. And we are not worried every time there is a policy provision, people are threatening to walk out and this and that. So to avoid that situation. These are some of the things, challenges. I've already talked about many of the challenges that we're experiencing. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. This is the second GNU that we have. The first GNU was in 1994. But this 1994 GNU was legislated. In fact, it was in the interim constitution. So we knew that if political parties get certain votes, they would then form a government. So there was legislation to it. The 1996 Act 108, which is the constitution, the current constitution, did not envisage a time where there would not be a majority party or elections would not have a clear winner at a national government level or at national and provincial government level. So with this one, there was a clear transition. There was a smooth transition. It was trying the intention of that GNU. We're coming from a post-conflict situation, fragmented governance system where we had a number of governance systems and all of that. And that was supposed to help us in addressing some of those issues. And it was also about nation building that we were at that point. So this one, the second version of GNU that we have, in my view, it left all of us as voters out of the negotiation table in forming a new government. So we're just informed of this new government that we all did not participate. We are the ones who voted. We are the ones who decided that we're not giving any political party 50+1. But in terms of forming a government, which is formed by 50+1, we're all not included. Maybe the justification might be the 14 days, which I accept. That might be the justification for that. I don't think it also took into consideration a number of these things that I'm raising there in terms of ensuring that. And these are the challenges that are facing that government of national unity now. And one would have to think about these in order for you to be able to formulate a government in any sphere. In local government, as I indicated, coalition governments and governments of national unity, whatever you call it, have started in 2016 already. And they've been collapsing precisely because of this same issue, that if you don't have a common agenda other than starting with allocating positions, because I think that's a challenge is that the starting point becomes allocating positions, and thereafter you then say, what is the program that we are going to undertake? And if you do that, then you are going to have challenges in terms of what we want to see. The challenges of unemployment are continuing. The cost of living is getting even higher. We know that we nearly we were just spared for a year. We're going to have a VAT hike, but we're just spared for a year. So it's from next year, we'll have that. There will be better preparations to introduce it to us and all of that. And a number of other things. The electricity tariffs now. If you buy electricity now, we can see an ordinary man on the street in the next few months or in the next year would not be able to afford electricity. So we might have a lot of what you call this is nyoga, where people illegally connect electricity because they cannot afford to buy it.
I mean, if structurally you are forcing them out of buying it legally, then they are going to look for illegal means to be able to access this particular service. And the government that is caring should appreciate that and be able to infuse that in their policies. And many of these things that I'm not going to go through, then there are also good things, as I indicated in my last bullet. There are good things that are also happening with this GNU, such as there are some progress in terms of infrastructure. There are some progress in terms of processes, but this is not sufficient. We deserve more, and public leaders should ensure that we get that more that we deserve. And I think it should look at two things, structurally and contextually. And if we don't look at structural first and then look at contextual, what kind of space we operate in, what kind of environment we operate in, and how do we ensure that in the space that we operate in, we cultivate or we have leaders that are able to address some of these challenges that I've talked about, that leaders that are able to adapt to the changing context in the country and be able to innovate around dealing with issues. Invest in continuous learning might be very important that we do that. And not only on these, these study visits that are done that do not make any impact coming back to the country, but something that are going to be tangible, that we are going to see people doing some. I know my time is up. I'm going to, the strategy, I think that one of the things that leaders should also be shaped by institutions. We say leaders must be shaped, or leaders must shape institutions. But I think also leaders must be shaped by institutions. By this I mean, when you move from a private sector to a public sector institution, you must understand that the context is different. And therefore your mindset should shift. It can't be business as usual when you move one sector to the other, especially with the current challenges that we have in our country. And lastly, we need to have leaders that are visionary. And I think this is the process that can help us with cultivating such leaders that are visionary. Thank you so much. And I apologize for this mocha.
Questions or comments?
Prof. Deon, how does one combat corruption?
Okay. That's a very difficult question. I think corruption or combating corruption should be a societal issue. It can't be left to public institutions only. It talks to values that we've talked about earlier. We should, it's not something that you can only leave it up to education institutions to teach people about ethics and all of that, but it should be a societal issue. And once you have dealt with it at a societal level, I think instances of corruption would reduce. I'm not sure whether we would eradicate it completely, but instances of corruption would drastically reduce. Having honest people being trusted with public institutions and public resources would also help with that. It is very difficult to identify honest people, especially processes such as interviews for a 30-minute session. It is not sufficient, in my view, to identify whether a person is honest or not. Even the tests that we do, they are not sufficient for us to be able to determine whether people are honest or not. So it is something very difficult that one would have to grapple with. But it must start at the top. If the tone is set at the top correctly, it is easier to deal with challenges that we see at the lower level. But if the tone at the top is not set properly, then you are owed to continue with challenges.
Thank you very much for your insightful lecture. It gives us a good understanding of the GNU. Two questions. First, you mentioned that we have weak institutions, but I thought we have, by the press of Constitution, a number of Chapter 9 institutions. If you took one of them, for example, he ought to the under protection. We thought we had Title 6, but we had one risk support. So is the institutions weak or the people who populate it? It's my first question. My second, we're looking at leadership for the future, young people. Yet when you look at the youth of the country at the moment, many of them have not registered to vote. Others don't vote. And while I look at the university during my time, the students were very altruistic. They made many sacrifices, and many of them very present or generous. Today, the students are copied, looking at their own beers. What has gone wrong? How we got to motivate a new generation of leaders?
Let me start with the second one so that I don't forget. Thank you very much, Prof, for those questions. I think society in general, not only young people, society in general has become individualistic. So the Ubuntu that you talked about earlier on in terms of it's actually non-existence in practice. We see that in paper, but in practice does not exist. Therefore, I do think that young people look at the public system, the public office or public departments and all of that, and they don't see them as effective. And therefore, they don't see voting as helping in trying to address that situation. And in fact, this is a tool that they have to change the situation that they don't like. But we need to encourage them to be able to use this tool more effectively. Currently, they are discouraged, they are unemployed, and so forth and so forth. And that, I think, leads to them not really thinking that this instrument, which is voting, which you correctly said, your generation fought very hard to have this instrument. And therefore, that is why they hold dearly. And these ones don't realize. And maybe we also, people that we need to look up to, heroes, idols or role models and all of that are far in between in the country currently when you talk about people that have gone through that process and seen or having gone through the different phases of the struggle and all of that. And we need more of you in that space so that youth can be encouraged around that. The second one about weak institution, in my view, this is my personal view and I don't have empirical evidence on it, is that I look at state-owned entities, for example. Whether they function or not depends on who is at the helm of that institution. So ideally, institutions would function irrespective of who is at the helm. So this machine must keep on rolling irrespective of who is at the helm. And currently, you have indicated we have quite about almost 5 public protectors, and only one was effective. And the previous one was effective with all cases that she has lost. So you have those instances where you have people that are not functioning, people that are not delivering as they should, and they use these institutions for their own personal benefit rather than for the greater good or for public good. So you would have that. And in my view, and that's where I'm saying it is not scientific, I don't have empirical evidence, it is deliberate. It seems there are science or evidence to tell that it is deliberate that people have weakened public institutions for their personal benefit. And that's what we are seeing. But institutions are getting weaker and weaker, and we have people that are getting stronger and stronger. Things cannot happen because of them. And that is why we also see a lot of people wanting to be public representatives, because they see if you are a public representative, then you immense this so much authority, power, and all other things that are nicer to have. Yes.
So, just to add, I'd like to get your view about the value of the fact that we are a constitutional democracy. America is a constitutional democracy, and having spent time there recently and in the past, I'm more concerned about the United States as I'm concerned here, as far as the implementation of the policies in the constitutional democracy. We have in America a executive and a legislature that is not respecting the Constitution, not respecting the tenets of the democracy. I don't see that here. There's a different motivation. I think we are, to our credit, respectful of our Constitution and of the judiciary, both the executives and the legislature. Yes, we can. There is an ethics problem. When you say ambidextrous, I thought you were going to say, yeah, our public leaders, they give with the one hand and they take with the other.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And I just want you to comment on the fact that we are a constitution. Is that a safeguard against the total collapse?
I certainly agree with you. I call it our constitution the last line of defense. And the judiciary. Of course, I'm a bit worried with what Mr. Mkhona has said in that press conference, if indeed it's true. I don't know, because these are still allegations. But with our previous experience with the state capture, for example, the judiciary was the only institution that was actually not captured at the time. So our independence of our judiciary is very strong. I can demonstrate with examples. All of us were very worried when Mr. Zuma appointed Mogoeng as a Chief Justice because we thought they were very close. And the first judgment of Mr. Mogoeng was against Mr. Zuma. And there are many examples of that where you have your judiciary being very strong and you have your judiciary being independent. And if that can be eroded, we can have serious problems. So unlike many countries, even first world countries, we can look back at our constitution and say, at least with the tenets of democracy in terms of that, and with the independence of the different public institutions, that is still happening. Another example of the independence of the legislature was holding the Minister of Higher Education accountable. This we have not seen before. The robust nature, I know the tricks of television and all of that, but the robust nature in which the minister was held accountable by the legislature also demonstrate the independence of these different tiers of government. And that's important for us. And I think that's something that we pride ourselves of as a country, that even if we can elect anybody to be at the highest office in the country, the constitution will dictate that person must act in a particular manner. If he or she does not, then the constitution will ensure that it forces that individual to either act in that manner or leave the office. So that is still my comfort as well. And that's where I have hope in our country, that many of these challenges that we're experiencing, we need to come back together. We've done that in 1994, when many people thought this was a miracle and it would not last long. It lasted a few years after that. We can't do that again. I think there is still an opportunity for us to be able to do that. Okay, there's hands there and head there and hand there.
Thank you. I'm really glad you spoke of hope now, because, I was thinking it's been a tough morning. Sometimes you think the glasses are full or empty, that sometimes it's, where's the glass? Yeah. You're really starting to see the glass and you feel like Charles Glass, really. But I think, Brad Pretorius always says leaders deal in hope. Now, you touched on it, you spoke about the Constitution and the independence of the judiciary. From a practical point of view, maybe this is not only for yourself, you just happen to be the fun speaker, but as we come in to land the plane on the day, practical ways that we can install, create, renew hope. Because, what's the alternative, really? And in your view, anyone else, really, and so on, what's the 2 or 3 practical things we can sort of say, okay, let's, another Pollyanna, balloons, practical steps towards creating this resurgence of hope.
These are very difficult questions for an afternoon session. Look, I think one of the things that we need to do, it's people are very despondent, and therefore they've taken their hands off the deck. So I sometimes feel that we're on autopilot. People have just said, well, let's see what happens, and we need to go back to saying, people, let's take back our hands into the deck and ensure that we shape our own destination. And we can do that by ensuring that in the spaces that we have influence, we change the narrative. We ensure that the right people occupy those spaces where we have influence as a starting point. I think those are the things that we need to do. And if you think about the apartheid regime, had the ordinary people on the ground, had they not spoken and left it to the formations, the structures, nothing would have happened. There would have been setbacks, but nothing would have changed. We need people on the ground to unite, as South Africans always do, and take their own destination in their own hand. I think that maybe the starting point could be conversational of this nature,
And out of this conversation, we have follow-up conversations. We have had a conversation, and now on the 23rd of July, we meet a month later and say, how far have we gone to impact on society since our previous conversation? And continue to have these conversations of this nature. But if we are doing this things the same way and hoping for different solutions, that's not going to happen. So we need to change how we do things and hope to make an impact in terms of that.
So I'm wondering if we actually have an understanding, or have we made an assumption of what corruption is? Is there a collective understanding? I was wanting to go back to Marianne's point, and as an example, I'm thinking, if I went to a family function and one person works for Eskom and they have a whole conversation about corruption, and I say to the wife, oh, I heard your son was studying this or that at Stellenbosch, and she says, no, he did that last year. He said it's too much work, so he's doing something else now. But NSFAS is funding it. Is that not corruption? So is corruption only when government officials steal? Is it not when we also stealing? So I think you said that it's something society must tackle. As I think we also have to examine our own practices and our own values and how we understand corruption.
Yeah. No, I certainly agree with you. And there are different forms of corruptions as well. I think we need to have a broader definition of what corruption is and also deal with the different forms of corruption. For example, taking a 10 rand from the kitty or the petty cash because I want to take a taxi, it's raining. I thought I was going to walk to the train station, and now it's raining, and I take it back, and nobody notices I don't bring it back. Would that be corruption? I think we need to get to that level where we better understand what actions constitute corruption and what we can do, because there are many things that we do and hope and thinking that it is not corruptions, including myself. You know, we have got a term that we've used in South Africa of Coca-Cola. You know, the traffic officers, they're always thirsty on the road and they need a Coca-Cola. Are we not encouraging them to be corrupt by giving them that Coca-Cola, giving them that 20 rand so that they don't write you a traffic fine and all of that? Those are some of the forms of corruptions that we can talk about that do happen. So there are various forms of corruption, and I do think that not disclosing the whole truth and not be transparent is also part of corruption. Might not be monetary necessarily. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Dev. And this is a profound presentation. I'd agree with you. South Africa has weak democratic institutions and weak leadership. And I wonder, if this is an unintended consequence of democracy, our liberal multi-party parliamentary democracy. I want to draw your attention to some countries that actually has delivered on the promise of development and service delivery, but they are not necessarily liberal democracies. They are different political institutions, and we quite often frown upon their systems. We label them, in mainstream media as having authoritarian tendencies, but they actually do way better than our so-called liberal democracy. Maybe this is the time we should maybe pick outside the box and and create new institutions that can actually take on the promise of development. And I'll bring your attention to Southeast Asian economies. We talk to them as we become countries today, but they were in the same boat with sub-Saharan African countries, South Africa, like having enjoyed the decades of colonialism. After the Second World War, right, for example, Hong Kong, China, we're talking about Singapore, Taiwan, and many other, Southeast Asian countries. They actually moved from, the peripheral, category of countries into mid-become countries. Today, China is actually the largest economy world by having taken, the United States. And they did so the different system of government, right? It's a developmental state model, very strong, institutions, and very strong. In fact, they have a system called, the system of meritocracy, where public officials are appointed based on merit, not what we do here in South Africa, where we appoint our Congress system of patronage. Right. So I'm just telling everyone here to really think about communists differently, because we get stuck in these categories, right? That we embrace, but we don't actually look in the consequences of some of these institutions that we have chosen in the post-apartheid transition. So that's just my 2 cents. Comment, and it's a challenge to you as a professor of public administration. Maybe something that we could have a conversation about. Thanks.
Yeah, I have thought about that many times. The balancing in terms of democracy and ensuring that things are done. Because one has to show the balancing. For example, if you go to these examples that you made, if you go to China, they will tell you that they've got a democratic system because they have regular elections and so forth and so forth and so forth. But we know underneath that system, there is actually no fundamental democracy that is happening. The 10 years of democracy are actually not happening under that system. So it is a choice that we have to make. And my view is that we should have a conversation about what the country wants to achieve in the next 10 or 20 years. Once we all agree on that conversation, and we also have a conversation of what kind of leaders we want to take us to that trajectory. For example, if you look at a small town, I'm from a small town in the Eastern Cape. It is dying a slow death. I mean, in the next 2 or 3 years, it will not be a town, it will be a township rather than a town. And it is deliberate. I think it is deliberate that we have people that are weak and leading weak institutions and therefore do not care about some of the vision or do not have a proper vision of where we want to go. So we would have to make choices and difficult choices that we'd have to make in that instance. You talk about Burkina Faso, for example. I thought you were going to make an example of Burkina Faso, for example. What is happening in Burkina Faso? I think that is changing the trajectory of that country rapidly. I don't know whether it will be sustained or not, but it is changing rapidly. And they have made a choice. I don't know whether I had just recently Mali as well or another country. They've made a choice and we have to live with that choice that we have made. So we have to make choices, up to all of us to make choices. And you are right that the so-called Asian tigers and the countries that you've mentioned started at the same level as us, or even lower, some of them, than where we are. And now they are superseded. They're actually competing. Where we want to compete, actually, when I talked earlier on about playing in a global space, you need to be fit for purpose. They've actually ensured that they prepared themselves and they were fit for purpose to get to that level.
One last quick question.
Thank you, Professor. I'm just taking in the word or the term ambidextrous, and it's got such a beautiful ring to my ears. But I also want to acknowledge the weighty concept that it carries, particularly also the meaning that supports it, right? Both very weighty and also in terms of the term. And then to align it with, governance, and in particular the National Development Plan, and this beautiful utopia that is sketched for us, for the 2030, and that we already find ourselves in that, context. And that I would say maybe the exploration part of it. But it also then, for that not happening in democracy for taking so long, and people losing hope, the change of the Millennium Plan to the Sustainable Development Plan for 2030, of which we have 5 years, towards that utopia, and with very difficulty and complexity to see how we can, align this ambidextrous concept to that, sustainable development achievement of 2030. Maybe you can just a little bit. I know you've done justice. Kudos to you with such a weighty term in such a short period of time. Just a little bit how one can impact that meaning that underline, that or underpins ambidextrous. Thank you for the sustainable development. Thank you, Professor.
I think if you look at the Millennium Goals and you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, which talk to the Sustainable Development Plans and all of that, there was an engagement, there was a process of preparing, understanding the current context that we're dealing with, and exploring in terms of what can be achieved. The challenge, I think, that happened was that the playing fields were not leveled, in my view, that's my personal view, between the developing countries and the developed countries, and therefore impacted negatively on us achieving these particular goals in the next 5 years. I can tell you many of them. If we talk about climate change, for example, we will not be able to achieve it, the goals, the expectation. And we are not the culprit, the biggest culprit, but we are expected to meet the same standards as the biggest culprit. So this particular theory helps you to say, in one hand, you understand the current context that you are dealing with, you understand the capacity. In this other hand, what is possible, what is feasible. And we talk about realism. What is feasible, what is possible, what is realistic in this particular phase. And I think that's the missing link that we have in this sets. And that's probably the reason that we're not going to be able to meet the Millennium Goals. The other thing is also, I think, the willingness. Some people call it political will. The willingness, not only in South Africa, but globally, of ensuring. If you talk about the UN reforms, I mean, we've been talking about them for the past 20 years or so. The BRICS consortium that is disintegrating now. So worldwide, there is no willingness to hold the Southern Hemisphere on their hands and take them through to the next stage. And that is causing so much problems. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Zweni. We really appreciate your time and the insights that you've provided. And now I leave it to our own CEO, Mr. Basir Dramat, to conclude our proceedings.
Good afternoon, everyone. No presentation, don't worry. I know it's the graveyard shift. I'm just here to close the ceremonies. It's an honor and both a responsibility and an honor for me to close this conference today. I say responsibility as deliberately, not because they call me the CEO, but because leadership can't just be celebrated. I think it needs to be owned, shaped, and we should love leadership. This morning we have been challenged and inspired by powerful ideas, uncomfortable truths maybe, and various possibilities. But we've been reminded that leadership is not a theoretical concept. It is a practice that demands wisdom. It demands courage, humility, and most of all, accountability. Yeah, so I had a whole speech prepared, but it stole all of my time and so on. I just want to thank every person that made this possible, this conference. To our speakers, you brought us preachers, Dr. Jairam. I've met Dr. Jairam for the first time today, but we've been speaking for a year and a half. So the experience and depth that you brought and all the others, some of them have left, I think, to this conference. The organizing committee and the support teams all around us. Dr. Marianne, your work has been seamless, professional, and it's simply amazing to have a conference at Cornerstone. I just want to remind us that this will most probably be our last conference at this campus, but you are all welcome to come to our new campus in Salt River. It's an amazing place. It's almost done. I'm just doing my sales bit quickly. So we are going to be fully installed in Salt River from January, our new intake. Finally, I just want to say maybe it's time to move now beyond the slogans. I've heard a lot of slogans today. We do workshops on leadership. It's time to show our leadership. It's time to show it and I'm not speaking from an academic perspective. I'm speaking from
a leader of an amazing institute that I took over from amazing leaders. Dr. John Vollmann is I will never forget my first board meeting I had to attend. He had to calm me down because I was sweating, etc. So, and that was not too long ago. But how we teach our students, how we build our institutions, and how we hold ourselves accountable when no one is actually watching us. I think that is one of the takeaways I think that I will take from this conference that we had today. And if I may ask my team or even everyone here, is just to take with you for today to ask yourself, what kind of leader am I becoming? What am I doing for the next generation? And finally, am I willing to be uncomfortable in the service of truth? That just, if you can just take that away from this conference. So thank you very much for everybody participating.